Presenting a Canadian story I'm calling Sweet Sorrow. Growing up in a family where almost every single member was a diabetic, I quickly became aware that it took not only medication to ensure we live the same happy life as other Canadians, but it takes zero sugar products and their labeling, a reliance on that to make sure we're enjoying the same foods and beverages as everybody else. And this story isn't just personal to me, it echoes globally. 1 out of 9 adults, according to the International Diabetes Federation, has diabetes. 1 in 8 has impaired glucose tolerance, a pre-diabetic state, and 1 in 4 have insulin resistance. 1 in 8 are women with PCOS, half of whom will develop diabetes by age 40. All of these are groups of people that depend on zero sugar labeling in order to make the appropriate decisions for their health. So, looking at this screen, you may assume that these products, based on their labeling, are zero sugar. But the truth is, none of them are. They're actually hidden by hidden sugars behind labeling loopholes and complex names that most people don't understand. The truth is, as long as a product is under half a gram of sugar in Canada, it can be considered zero sugar. But this doesn't account for serving size. So when you're eating a zero sugar piece of candy, you can have multiple, and it's not truly zero sugar. And any amount of sugar will cause a greater impact for compromised folk versus the general population, leading to an erosion of trust. So I guess this table isn't showing up.
Sorry, I did have to change the PDFs into PowerPoint, so that's...
Okay, so what this was basically a look at consumer behaviors. We're seeing that more and more people, especially Canadians versus Americans, are looking for zero sugar labeling, and 3/4 of global consumers are, when they're grocery shopping, looking for sugar-free claims, showing a health-driven market growth. But there is a Canadian roadblock, and that is our regulatory gap, which again you're not able to see here. But Canada basically doesn't allow next-gen sweeteners like monk fruit and allulose, but over here what you'll actually see is countries like Australia, the EU, New Zealand, China, they all allow these next generation sweeteners. So it shows us that we have a long way to come. And so the cost of this is economic in that innovation is leaving Canada. Companies avoid Canada because of our long regulatory timelines that are rigid, and it causes our labels to become less competitive. And this forces a need to reformulate, which can cost companies dollars, and it leads to undesirable taste changes. So we end up with an inferior product, and Canada becomes a second-tier market for wellness innovation. The economic costs you can kind of visualize here. The actual numbers are on the black side, but Canada makes up only 2% of this zero sugar product market compared to almost 33% from our other North American counterparts. So how did we end up here? So we can see from the 70s to 90s that Canada starts to recognize the importance of labeling. And manufacturers voluntarily offer it, but it's nothing standardized. And by 2007, we see mandatory nutrition facts labeling, driven by demand, and it's on most prepackaged foods. Front of package labels are going to be mandatory by January 1st, 2026. That will be for foods high in sodium, sugars, and saturated fats, which is a step in the right direction, but current practices still fall short because zero sugar still doesn't mean no blood sugar impact, and it does not address current misleading labels. Companies keep exploiting loopholes, and the complexity continues to breed confusion. Many questions are also left unanswered. Do people recognize hidden sugar names? Do they trust the labels they're reading? And how many understand no added sugar versus zero sugar? These are answers we need to appropriately address the problem. And so, families like mine in Canada are struggling to trust the labels they're reading, and this is a sign that Canada needs to follow along with the rest of the world towards a change. And that change starts with a transparent label system. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies about the glitch with your slides. What we can do in the deliberation is I can pull up her actual deck, so you don't have to use your imaginations as much. Thank you, Kritika. Okay, so we'll start off our Q&A. I've lost track of who's leading what, but Julie, would you like to start?
I'm a little bit
bit curious, in this problem, it seemed like you had two major kind of focuses. One is sugar and alternates, and the other is labeling. And so you've explored those two pieces. How did you come that they were kind of, they seem like they might be two problems of each? Like,
Yeah,
So are you focusing on two problems or one? How did you choose to have those combined?
So what I found out from just researching was that both problems kind of feed into each other. The regulations force us to use outdated sweeteners that the rest of the world aren't using, like aspartame, and that forces us to use misleading labeling practices, and that erodes consumer trust. So I wanted to separate it, policy versus transparent labels, just to connect a bit better with our audience, because I think misleading labels is like everyone's problem and everyone can resonate with that we basically don't know what's in our food. And then policy, I think, addresses more of the root of the problem, which is equally as important, and they just feed into each other.
Thank you. So hard to separate the two. Kyle, would you like to go next?
So yeah, I noticed there's also strong emphasis on the Canadian component specifically. I guess to that end, like I believe you mentioned a couple other countries that have some alternative sweeteners. Can you speak more to their approach to labeling, perhaps like solutions that worked or didn't in other countries?
So do you have perspective from other countries?
Yeah, definitely. So Canada actually, with our regulations, even the way we decide what's being approved, the regulatory process is very outdated. So we have a vague term called a history of safe use, which is needed to approve sweeteners on the market. And that's why we still see sweeteners like aspartame that we have new data saying that it's harmful, but we still use it because of this vague history of safe use term that's needed. And it prevents us from using the next generation sweeteners like monk fruit and allulose that the rest of the world is approving because of this vagueness. And I think it's also a bit of a negligence towards updating policy that's causing this problem.
Thank you. Nabil?
No, for me, I wanted to ask about that actually. In terms of the alternative sweeteners that exist in the marketplace, I also am familiar a little bit about like aspartame. Is it harmful? Is it not harmful? Should we? Is too much of it? Because some people like excessive amounts in their coffee or whatnot. So on the spectrum of alternatives, what would be the ones that you recommend, or if you were the regulator, which would be the top 5, or what is the spectrum of alternatives that exist in the alternative sweetener market?
So curious about the spectrum of alternatives, and if you might like suggest ones that are, if you were the regulator, what would you say are some top ones?
So my personal favorites, I think, and this isn't regulated in Canada completely. They're regulated as tabletop safe, but you're not actually able to formulate them for products on retail, and that's allulose and monk fruit extract. Monk fruit extract comes from a fruit called monk fruit. Its origins are in China, and allulose is also naturally derived, and it doesn't have that latent sweetener taste. It tastes identical to sugar. And similarly to monk fruit, it's actually 200 to 300 times sweeter than sugar, so you only need to use very little to get that sweetness.
But beyond those two, is there 20? Is there 200? Like in terms of the spectrum of alternatives that exist?
The research is still like ongoing, and we see new ones coming out all the time. I wish I could think off the top of my head better answers for you, but I can tell you that in Canada we're very, very limited for what we can use in products. I think less than 10 alternative sweeteners are allowed for products in retail, most of which are not natural and still cause glucose spikes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kritika.